an honor to welcome.
He is one of the most well-known players on the world stage, respected for his unwavering commitment to international diplomacy, but also fiercely criticized for failing to stop the bloodshed in Rwanda, Bosnia, and most recently in Syria. In his new book, former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan attempts to shape how history will remember his 40 years at the United Nations.
Well, I hope that it will be said that he made a contribution.
Annan's name will forever be attached to some of the darkest chapters in the UN's history. He was the head of UN peacekeeping forces when some 800,000 people were killed in Rwanda. The next year, more than 8,000 Bosnian men and boys were slaughtered in Srebrenica, which had been designated a so-called UN safe area.
You said with regards to Rwanda and Bosnia, we patently failed or were seen to have failed. Do you believe that you failed?
Of course we failed. Not only that, I apologize on behalf of the UN and on my own behalf.
Annan writes that the experiences of Rwanda and Bosnia pushed him to try to shape the UN into an organization that would, quote, step up rather than stand by.
We've intervened to make life easier for people living with HIV/AIDS. In the cases of tsunami in Indonesia, earthquake in Pakistan, and non-health issues where the avian flu broke out in Asia.
Do you think perhaps the United Nations is better equipped to deal with issues like disease and development rather than conflict?
Maybe you are right. In the health and other areas, we have the tools and the systems in place, and governments by and large cooperate. When it comes to peacekeeping, the UN has no standing army. We borrow troops from governments, and sometimes the governments give us the troops, and sometimes they don't.
But he has spent most of his life trying to overcome those limitations.
It is good to see so many countries represented here.
We are the only organization with universal convening power that can bring every country under the sun in one conference room and say, let's discuss this. It's not a perfect organization, but it's the best we've got. We started here in 1962 with World Health Organization.
This is your home, in a sense.
I know.
His original home is the West African nation of Ghana. At the age of 18, he gained a scholarship to attend Macalester College in Minnesota. From there, it was on to the UN, where he became known for his mild-mannered brand of diplomacy.
Have you ever lost your temper?
Sometimes, but not by pounding the table. Those who know me can tell when I'm upset. They see it in my eyes, and sometimes there's a certain edge to the voice.
In his role as Secretary General, Annan has sat down with some of the most brutal dictators, including Saddam Hussein.
What were your impressions of Saddam Hussein?
Not what one would expect. He was calm, hardly moving his hands, which is unusual in the region, and makes you wonder, can this man sitting here talking calmly and yet is so capable of all the things that we know he has done?
It was the 2003 war in Iraq that perhaps proved the greatest threat to the UN's authority. The Security Council was pushed out of the way by the US and its allies, and the war commenced without the Council's permission.
Today, despite the best efforts of the international community and the United Nations, war has come to Iraq for the third time in a quarter of a century.
Do you think that the invasion of Iraq in some ways almost jeopardized the very existence of the United Nations?
It brought very serious tensions in the organization, and tensions that took quite a while to heal. But I think that was the finest moment of the Council, to refuse to support a war that, in my judgment, was illegal.
Despite his strong objections to the war, Annan sent one of his top lieutenants and a close friend, Sergio de Mello, to manage its aftermath. when a suicide bomber hit a UN meeting on August 19, 2003, 22 people were killed, including de Mello.
For him to be blown away the way it was so painful. And I don't think many people knew the agony, the pain.
At the end of 2006, Annan stepped down as Secretary General, but this year he took on one final mission to act as the UN Special Envoy to Syria, where a brutal conflict has left 20,000 people dead in the last 18 months. Annan drew up a 6-point peace plan that called for an immediate ceasefire and the beginning of talks, but the ceasefire didn't hold.
I've spent a lot of time on the ground inside Syria. I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you.
Sure.
What began as a disappointment with the United Nations on behalf of the opposition has now turned into outright animosity. And I've seen and heard people chanting slogans against you.
A mediator is not brought on board to join one camp or the other. The mediator's role is to find a way out of the conflict.
I can't want peace more than the protagonist.
In July, Annan announced that he was stepping down from his role in Syria.
I did what I could. I did not resolve the conflict. The effort has failed.
When you look back at all the lessons that were learned from Rwanda, from Bosnia, and yet here we are in 2012 in Syria, and it feels like we're back to square one.
Yeah. It says something about us human beings, doesn't it? Do we ever learn? Is it in our DNA to keep fighting each other?
Annan now plans to take a step back from diplomacy and concentrate on some projects that will allow this very private man some peace and quiet, something that his work has not.
What is next for Kofi Annan?
I'm going to live.